Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dawn of Drones podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. We are in the best of 2021 month, and I cannot believe it's December and we're already at the end of the year. How insane is that? We are so blessed to have with us today Miriam McNabb from DroneLife. So I'm sure you guys all figured out that DroneLife is our serious partner in this podcast, and to have Miriam, and being one of the top editors in the commercial drone, and now more and more so in the military drone space and DoD space, it's absolutely phenomenal. So welcome to the podcast, Miriam.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really fun. Of course, I've been connected as I've seen your other podcasts, but really exciting to be here myself.
Well, we had Miriam on our Clubhouse last week, everybody, and I used to say, oh, well, if you missed it, too bad, because there's no taping, but guess what? It is. There's a playback function now, so go back and listen to that. If you're not on Clubhouse, join it. And if you missed any of our episodes this year, on the Dawn of Drones, you can go back to DroneLife TV on YouTube and watch those replays on demand. I mean, absolutely spectacular lineup this year, and we are going to end this year with a huge bang, Miriam being part of that lineup. So Miriam, let's talk a little bit about you. So everybody knows DroneLife, right? And by the way, everybody, if you're not subscribed to DroneLife, you want to, because every day some great stuff will be dropping into your inbox. That will inform you about the news going on around the world in drones and advanced air mobility. But Miriam, how did you get there? Tell us a little bit about your background.
So I am a serial entrepreneur, and in 2013, a group of investors and our publisher, who was a veteran of ZDNet and other news sites, brought us in to help him build out this new site, on this really new niche thing, commercial drones. And so in the beginning, they needed somebody to produce content. That was me. We were writing about, exemptions, Section 333, et cetera, et cetera. That was it. I wrote 2 stories a day, Monday through Friday. And, I really just got totally hooked. I couldn't wait to see what happened next. And here we are, 3,000 articles later. I still don't understand all of the 3-letter acronyms, but I feel like I've had the best job I've ever had. I love going to shows. I love seeing people in the industry. This is kind of an amazing point in time in this industry to be witnessing and writing about and participating in. So I get new stuff across my desk every single day. Really exciting and just so interesting every single day.
Absolutely. I mean, you just said a couple things that I think are great segues into what we'll be talking about, which is this year. I mean, you talked about inflection point. What a year it was. I mean, COVID aside, right? We're kind of hopefully coming out of that. I know there's an I think if it showed us anything, it's that drones can really do some great things for society, especially as the ultimate social distancer, right? So by the way, everybody, before I start asking Miriam questions, ask your questions, right? This is live, so drop your questions in the chat. You've got this expert here, so don't waste this time. I can ask her questions all day long and even after this, but drop in where you're from, what you're doing, what questions you have, and give us some positive encouragement. We always love that. But back to 2021, Miriam, and let's talk about drones in particular. So much happened this year, this term inflection point. Let's start at the top. Let's talk about maybe on the regulatory side. What would you say, were maybe the 1 or 2 biggest things that you saw that are starting to move this industry really forward, took a big leap this year?
Yeah, I think that there are 2 things that just sort of jump out at me. And one of them, as I mentioned on our Clubhouse, this is cheating a little bit, right? It came out the end of last year, but I really think that remote ID has been a big topic in the drone industry this year. And the reason that I would point that out as something of significance, while it has not been necessarily implemented everywhere, getting that public, along with, of course, flight over people and flight at night, those were also important. But getting that published really kind of allowed the drone industry to say, okay, this is the direction that regulators are thinking of. This is what they've published. Now we can start to look at this and work with it. It's a foundational piece of unmanned traffic management. So whether you liked it or whether you didn't like it and how you feel about the details, it being published, the fact of it being published, moved the ball forward for UTM implementation and for drone integration, for fully integrating commercial drones at scale into the airspace.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's number one, remote ID, right?
Remote ID.
What would you say maybe was the second biggest thing?
BVLOS. And while BVLOS hasn't necessarily been published yet,
Right.
we're going to hopefully see that by the end of the year, something come out, or maybe next year, we'll see. With the Beyond program, the FAA is really making a push on BVLOS flights. So we're seeing a lot more BVLOS waivers. We're seeing a lot more BVLOS projects. We're seeing a lot more testing. And that's very significant for the commercial drone industry, in my view, because it opens up some applications that we haven't necessarily seen people make a big deal about. Now, we've talked about drone delivery, and drone delivery I hope we'll address later because that's a huge thing this year. But
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
about cargo delivery? When you're talking about somebody being 50 miles out on a pipeline and they're waiting for a piece of equipment, those huge value for industry applications, but they require BVLOS flight. A lot of the medical things, organ transport, things like that, they require BVLOS flight.
Yeah, well, that's probably a great time. Now's probably a great time to talk about the article you just published about MassDOT, right? MASSDOT, doing some BVLOS flights out to some of the islands, kind of more in your neck of the woods, right? Up in the Northeast.
It is, yeah.
So,
I live about an hour north of Boston, and so this is a perfect example. Cape Cod is the arm of Massachusetts. It's a big vacation area. It's, of course, a narrow spit of land surrounded by water,
yes.
but it also includes a lot of islands, offshore energy plants, and islands that you've heard of, like Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket.
Right.
So these places are hard to get to, even in the height of summer. You can only reach them by bridge or by ferry or by airplane. And in a case of an emergency where you have a flooding event, a weather event, whatever it may be, those communities, and there are year-round communities there, are really cut off. So this is the perfect application for a drone to deliver necessary medical services, for a drone to deliver supplies. So Mass Department of Transportation engaging with skyports to work this out and figure out how they can keep those communities connected, especially during the winter months. Really important stuff, but require BVLOS flight again.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned a whole host of use cases, if you will, for whether it's, cargo delivery, disaster response, I think you just mentioned. What would you say would be maybe the top three use cases that you really saw kind of exponentially grow this past year?
So, without a doubt, we got to start with drone delivery, because drone delivery just moved forward in so many different ways. And so we have Google Google's Wing doing drone delivery in kind of a little bit different way in communities in the US and heavily in communities in Australia,
Yeah.
which is significant because they're making the case and they're building the data set. And they're bringing the data set back here and saying, this is what we found, and that's really useful in getting approvals across the globe. Then we have Walmart moving forward on drone delivery, making a huge investment in drone services company DroneUp this year.
Yep.
Working with Zipline. Walmart has their supply within 10 miles of 90% of the population of the US. Their
Yeah, I mean,
supply
you could
is
pretty much
near
like
their
throw a
customer.
stone. You
Yes.
could throw a stone and hit a Walmart, right? So,
Right. I mean, this is ideal for drone delivery. The pandemic, people have been ordering things by app. They're used to ordering things by app. They're used to getting things delivered. They're used to avoiding those retail environments.
absolutely.
Walmart moving forward, putting tons of money into it, building out those first drone delivery sites, really important. And also medical drone delivery kind of continuing. And in
Yes.
the pandemic, I think people are seeing the value. This isn't just about burritos. This is
Yeah.
about delivering medicines to the senior community where you really don't want vulnerable people to have to be exposed to a retail environment, in this
Right.
particular case, all kinds of things. So, drone delivery, definitely number one. Number two, I really have to say that public safety has taken a leap forward in using drones. Yeah, just such great new developments, great new products out there, a lot more adoption, and shout out to those public service agencies, drone responders and Chula Vista and all of the actual community policing that's happening. They're doing a great job communicating the benefit with the public, really maintaining transparency, really putting that at the forefront of their efforts. And we are seeing kind of good feedback from there. So when you use drones as first responders, you're really keeping everybody safe. You're keeping the officers safe. You're keeping the suspects safe. You're keeping the community safe. It's win-win-win all the way around. And so really a great application, and we're definitely seeing that grow this year.
Yeah, we talked about this, Miriam, but when the FAA did their Drone Safety Awareness Week back in September, you posted up the videos that Dave Krause from Influential Drones and I did. And when I saw that one day's theme that the FAA put out, public safety, public acceptance, initially I scratched my head like, what's the connection here? But then it was like, ding, ding, ding. Okay, yeah, they're like probably the most visible folks that are using these, right? Because the public may or may not see drones being used on a construction site or for methane emission, monitoring, right? But they're both very important applications, but they are going to see it when it's happening in their community and the law enforcement are using it. So I agree. Like folks like drone responders, Chris Todd and AIRT. I mean, just doing amazing things this year. My last count, I feel like they were up to more than 5,000 members and growing. And speaking of resources and things like that, folks, if you're not a member of Drone Responders, if you're not part of public safety, you should join. It's free, and they put out such great information. So, all right. So drone delivery, public safety. What's your number three?
So my number three, I would have to say, is automation. So automation has been a big word in the drone industry for the last couple of years, but I got to say that this year it really sort of took on more significance.
Yeah.
So automation is being used sort of more drone in the box systems. So when we say automation, we have everything from Skydio, which, when Skydio talks about automation, they talk about reducing the cognitive load of a pilot, about saying, hey, if you are a first responder and you've got to use this drone, you need to be concentrating on this whole situation that's going on around you. You can't be worried about every little nuance of what's happening with the wind coming in and hitting your drone. So they talk about automation in those terms, but we also have automation that's really, if you think about a drone operating for surveillance or something on a very remote site where your drone operator may be several hundred miles away and you've got a drone that is launching itself, running its mission, coming back to base, charging itself, and so forth, that kind of automation has also made major progress this year. So I think that for certain applications, really highly valuable commercial and industrial applications with surveillance, remote sites, energy sites, mining sites, and construction sites, and so forth, that kind of automation really made some significant progress this year. Again, it's tied to BVLOS. It all goes kind of together, and we'll see how it goes. But the technology is making big strides forwards, and the regulation is kind of inching up there to meet it, to allow those testing, that testing to happen and those pilot projects to occur.
Absolutely. I mean, we just had Tom Fury, CEO of Sage Tech Avionics. By the way, shout out Sage Tech, sponsor of this month. Doing incredible work on the military side with identify friend or foe, transponders, IFF, but also detect and avoid, and that automation, right? To like not only detect it, but once you detect something coming your way, like to then avoid it. So great stuff. Thank you, Sage Tech, for sponsoring this month. But I also wanted to say we have, before you go out there, who threw in the chat that when they got their 107, the tester said 90% of the people getting their 107 were first responders. So to your point, Miriam, this your number two, use case, public safety, first responders, absolutely. We see it just continuing to grow. That is amazing stuff. I want to talk about advanced air mobility, but before, let's do that. Let's talk about AAM next. Okay, so AAM, we know, is a very broad term. It can actually incorporate small drones doing advanced operations like beyond visual line of sight. But let's talk about some of the larger aircraft, electric vertical takeoff landing, some of the things you're seeing in that kind of larger drone, larger cargo and passenger space. What would you say were kind of the top 3 developments this year for AAM? BVLOS aside.
Yep. So AAM is one of my favorite things to write about. I love the images. I love seeing
some cool
prototypes at schools, at shows. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I love thinking about it. People always ask me if I would ride in a passenger drone, and I gotta say, Dawn, I have 2 teenage drivers and an 83-year-old father. I will take the drone any day, like any time. Put me in the drone.
Love it.
I would be so happy to do that. So many great advancements. So number one, we got to say urban air mobility. Urban air mobility happening all over the world. We have to say, in Asia, certainly happening more rapidly. I'm seeing developments where Japan, for example, has set up a regulatory body specifically for urban air mobility. They are intending to have working urban air mobility within the next 5 years. South Korea, the same. China, absolutely. Indonesia, we're seeing unmanned urban air mobility projects going on that way. We are also seeing a lot of progress with manned eVTOL flights or crewed eVTOL flights. And I'll say this because I think that it has to do with drones, and my excuse for covering this amazing technology, which I just love, is that a lot of those are built with automation. So they're designed to be crewed, to have an operator in the vehicle with you when they first come out, but at some point could possibly lose the seat for the operator and be uncrewed systems. So that's really interesting. We saw Steve Dixon take the stage and say that he was expecting to see urban air mobility within the next 2 or 3 years. So I
And I'm
think
sure
that
people know who Steve Dixon is, but if you don't,
FAA
because
administrator.
sometimes I'm on this, the FAA administrator. Yeah, so I mean, that's big, right? He gets on the stage and says, hey, in the next 5 years, we're going to see this. And Miriam, Vertical Flight Society is an example. They put out this amazing directory every year. It's free. You can go online and check it out. There's well over, I think last count, well over 500 different designs and vehicles in all different levels of progress. Some of them flying today, right? Not just prototypes or, pen to paper. So just amazing stuff. Absolutely. So what else? What are you thinking for AAM this year?
Okay, so second thing we've got to say is cargo. And cargo, it has amazing potential, I guess I would say, for industry. So eVTOL cargo drones shipped to shore in ports, as I mentioned, kind of out on pipelines, transportation infrastructure. So those cargo eVTOL aircraft, that's just a huge, huge potential happening.
Well, and I mean, it's actually happening in some locations, right? So I'll give you one example. Saberwing aircraft out of California, Ed DeReyes, by the way, sponsor of a Women to Watch Global Awards Leadership Award, which is kind of the one that I received in 2019. So it's like near and dear to my heart. They're doing that stuff, right? They're out there, I think in Alaska, and in the Hawaiian Islands, actually with their Regal aircraft, it's called, doing this work. So absolutely, these kind of aircraft doing cargo in the military, right? Military is highly interested in this. We've seen this with AFWorks and some of the early certifications they're giving, not just for, that, like you said, Miriam, the eventual, maybe even personnel recovery aircraft that will maybe only have one, what they call a PJ on board, the person that goes down and actually, has medical training and can get the person onto the aircraft and off the battlefield. But for cargo, all the services are looking at this. Absolutely. So what's number 3 in your book for AAM?
I gotta say public safety again, wildfire response. So you have covered this on the Dawn of Drones podcast. It's a really huge application and it's huge progress. I mean, let's face it, the world was on fire this year in a horrible, horrible way. We need all the help we can get on this. And unmanned aircraft, eVTOL aircraft that can carry equipment to first responders, that can carry the sensors to enable more sophisticated fire management, all of those things. It's such a great application. It's such a help to communities. It's such a help to first responders. I would have to say that was one of the major applications we saw grow this year.
Absolutely. And I think what you were mentioning was the podcast we had back in August, one of our first ones with Todd Spain of the Advanced Air Mobility Collective, whose mission in life is to bring together all of these different ecosystem resources to assist with disaster response with an emphasis on wildland firefighting and healthcare delivery. And then, of course, Ben Miller from my home state here, Colorado, the Colorado Center of Excellence for Advanced Technology Aerial Firefighting. It's a mouthful. But they're collaborating now, Miriam, and they're building this thing called the Forest Tech Center, and it's going to be a national and global treasure. So that funding's rolling in, and I'm so excited to see what happens in 2022. So great examples of some of the best things we saw in AAM. Let's talk writ large in, from small drones all the way up to large and just kind of the industry in general. And I want to pivot for a second because I just mentioned women in drones and talk for a second about diversity or industry diversity and what we saw happen this year. Because we've seen some recent movement here, really, I'd say more towards the end of the year. Let's talk a little about that. What were your observations about industry diversity?
So I have to say that, I think that there's a lot of progress being made, and I think that there's recognition that we kind of need to make progress on this. When you have 5% of the industry, like you know, and everybody's got help wanted signs up, like, hey guys, you know, you're missing out on a lot of the population. 5% is a really low number. On the other hand, here are you and me, like, we're not having Women's Week here.
No,
right? You're doing
no,
your
I mean,
thing,
when I
I'm
say
doing my thing.
diversity, you know, I mentioned women in drones, right? Because I'm highly involved in that, the ambassador of the
Yeah,
Global Awards program.
but
But
this week we're just you brought on the editor of a news publication, and I'm talking to you know, one of the leading people in the drone industry doing podcasts. So this is not we're not having women's work. We're just doing our thing.
yeah,
So I think that's progress right there, right? I mean,
well, no, that's true. And, you know,
that's progress.
well, Miriam, I wanted to thank you because, you know, again, diversity, I mean, that's very broadly defined. And I mean, you published that article that I wrote. I mean, I had the absolute honor of writing about Rob Corbett and this idea of physical limitations or special abilities being something that we really need to consider when we think about inclusivity. You know, Rob, for those that don't know, go back and look at my article. It was published, Miriam published it on Veterans Day because Rob is a Air Force vet. You know, he's a quadriplegic and he's out there, like, you know, beating the drum, if you will, and helping others, you know, that have physical limitations to be able to fly drones because it's his passion. And I love what he's doing. And, you know, of course, you and I, you know, we come from a certain perspective, but, you know, there's race, there's, you know, just diversity of thought. And all of those things are so important to advance the industry. And Miriam, what I loved this year was that the FAA started really taking a look at it. And, you know, you and I talked about this offline. You know, they just changed the term, the acronym NOTAM, Notice to Airmen, to Notice to Air Missions, to make it more inclusive. And it was interesting to see the feedback on that. You know, I mean, to me, you know, words matter. And anytime you can, let's use the aviation term, open the aperture to make something more inclusive, and, you know, when somebody reads it, it doesn't shut them down immediately. I think that's progress. That's just my personal view. You know, now whether you agree, oh, it's to missions and not to certain people, it's like, okay, but the point was, wasn't just necessarily about women. It was about drones. It was about eVTOL. It wasn't just about general aviation. So they really, I think, went out of their way to make it uber inclusive by making it missions. And I believe you feel the same way, but, you know, there's a lot of people that don't. And, you know, it's just interesting. But what I loved this year was some really strong men coming out and talking about these things. Frankly, white males, like, you know, Vertical Flight Society, Mike Hirschberg did an amazing editorial just about the engineering career field in general and how if we don't fix this problem and inspire the next generation, we are going to be out of Schlitz, you know, in less than 10 years, and won't have the engineers or the mechanics to actually make all of these aircraft fly, from small drones up to large.
You know, and I have to say that on the NOTAM name change, which I published, and I'm just gonna put my head up above the parapet for people to throw tomatoes at, like, fine, you know, like it or loathe it. What I gotta say is, why would you want to leave it the same for 100 years? So you're asking the FAA to expand their regulatory framework to incorporate new vehicles, you know, new technology, new advancements. And everybody's complaining they're not moving fast enough, you know, they're not allowing drone integration. We have these old outdated regulations that aren't designed to accommodate uncrewed systems and other types of aircraft. Okay, so now they're trying to go out and, like, review all their stuff and change it and update it. You know, things are not supposed to stay the same for 200 years. Like, you know, if they did, we'd be in trouble. So, at some point they have to sort of evolve and change. What's the problem? Like, I don't get it. Like,
Yeah.
what's your argument for keeping it that way? I don't understand why you wouldn't want things to be sort of updated and made more flexible to accommodate change and new technology. I've heard the same people who are complaining about this complain about the fact that the FAA is trying to squeeze new technology into old regulations. So hey, they're trying. They're working to expand it.
No, I
So
agree.
that's kind of my take on that. But I
Yeah.
do think, and shout out to, and Skydio is a client, but I would say this anyway, and I wrote the first articles when they were not a client. Shout out to companies like Skydio that do have a platform and use their platform to some extent to go out and say, hey, we are committed to promoting women from within. We are committed to making sure that any woman who wants to, fly or move within the company is able to do that. And we are actually putting our name out there and saying, hey, we're making diversity an issue in our company. So I
I love
think,
it. And it's
there
not
are
just,
other examples too, but I
yeah,
really
I
got to
mean, look,
say, like,
they
kudos.
sponsored with Wounded Eagles UAS and a couple other groups, not for profits on Veterans Day, a big giveaway to wounded warriors, which was spectacular. So we're talking about that, inclusivity writ large. Mira Marquez was on the Canadian Advanced Air Mobility Initiative LGBTQ event, and so I absolutely love what they're doing because it's all about like, look, we are better together, all of us. Like, let's make that happen. And we're talking about perception. So let's pivot and talk a little bit about that public perception. Do you think public perception that we move the needle on that at all this year? When it comes to
Absolutely.
drones, and advanced air mobility.
Yes, absolutely. I do think that we have moved the needle on public perception, and I'm so happy to be able to say that this year. A few years back, I published an article where they had done this survey in the UK, asking people what they thought about drone delivery, asking what they thought about drone technology. It was very negative. People were like, yeah, we don't need drone delivery. We don't even get what the point is.
Right,
Not in
right.
my backyard. All of that. I can remember covering a Senate hearing where one senator said, we don't need drone delivery. We have enough truck drivers out of work, and was just so negative about it. And what I've seen this year is, Virginia Tech going out and doing research in Christiansburg, Virginia, which
Yep.
is Google Wing's test community for drone delivery, and asking those people, not the people who have just heard about drones, but the people who are actually experiencing drone technology in their
Yeah.
community. And when
Right.
you ask those people what they think about drone technology, what they say is, how come I can't get it at my house? I need it at my house too. Why are they only doing it in this area? And they have a very high percentage positive public perception.
I think it was over 80%, Miriam, if I recall correctly. And here's the other thing about that. There is a nexus here, like what you're saying. Like, so this research on drone, it's that if you can see it, you can believe it. If you can see it, you can be it, and that applies across the board, whether it's accepting drones as a technology, whether it's accepting the fact that, as a young person, whatever walk of life I come from, I can get into this industry and be a part of it. I mean, there is definitely a nexus there. And I think that research that you're talking about kind of proves that concept of the acceptance that comes when you can visibly see the benefits and the positive, impacts of having this technology or these people involved in your industry. And I love that. So I totally agree. I think we have moved the needle a little bit. And, props to Virginia Tech and the folks they worked with. Folks out there like Flight Crowd in the advanced air mobility area out of the UK, of course, in the United States, we have the Community Air Mobility Initiative, the Urban Low Altitude Transport Authority, my buddies from Jersey, I'm on that board, Truth in Lending, but so many groups out there that are really trying to get that word out of, hey, there is greatness here. And Advanced Mobility Collective, Nicole Ramsey, by the way, she says, I'm all for public safety, AAM. We're having some great stuff coming out of the Advanced Mobility Collective, and Nicole's a big part of that. She's kind of their, she's Sergeant Holka, the big toe of the collective. Let's just call her what she is. So great to have you out there, Nicole. Let's pivot for a second, Miriam. We don't have a ton of time left, and we have so much ground to plow, or airspace to fly in, I guess, to use the right, the right term here. Safety, security, privacy. Okay, I would call them the big three when it comes to drones, like and public perception. Safety, security, privacy. Let's just briefly talk about maybe any updates, anything that you saw in a positive way in any one of those areas in 2021.
Sure. So, safety, security, and privacy is such an integral issue of drone integration.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, whose privacy are you talking about? You're talking about everybody's privacy. The privacy of the drone operator. Should everybody be able to know where your drone is? The privacy of the customer. Should everybody be able to know that you got a drone delivery from CVS, or the privacy of the community that the drone is flying over? What can the drone see? And everybody's got concerns here.
Yes.
And I think that we are making progress in addressing those concerns. And I think this goes back to what we just talked about. When you have the opportunity to experience drones in your community, then you kind of get that maybe not that the concerns aren't as important, but the reality of what the technology is doing becomes more clear. And so I am old enough to remember, Dawn, that when smartphones came out, everybody was up in an uproar. People are going to be filming you when you're on public transportation. People are going to be creepy. People are going to be posting images. Did that ever happen? Absolutely. There are like creepy people out there. Yes, of course. But am I giving up my smartphone or the camera on my smartphone? Absolutely not, because I know what the value of that smartphone technology is to me now. And it's way more important than the risk that there's going to be a creepy person in my car on the subway.
Yeah.
So I think that that's one thing, is as the value of drone technology goes forward, then those concerns are balanced a little bit more with, what the community actually experiences and what the real risk is. Okay, so that's one thing. I think when we're talking about security too with drones, because this is absolutely true, right? We've got a risk that drones are going to come over and disturb events or create
really
a security risk.
Bad,
do something bad. Absolutely.
Fortunately and unfortunately, right? So CNN, this, Miriam, CNN reaches out. I get my 5 minutes of fame. It's about some drone a year ago in Pennsylvania that had some copper wires and was at a electric substation. What was it going to do? And what made me sad about that was that I never got the chance to at the end say, but there's so many but there's so many drones with good stories. And so you get one like that, and then everybody talks about it, and that's the problem, is that that's what people latch onto when we're talking about public perception. But I think safety has come a long way with companies like White Fox Defense Technologies, which was our very first episode of this podcast ever, and the sponsor of our Impactful Use Cases Month. I really appreciate. And so many other amazing counter drone companies out there as well. So I think security and safety and privacy, I think we've come a long way. I think we have a long way to go. But what I will say about it, Miriam, I think you'll agree, it's all about transparency.
Absolutely. It's about transparency, but also, just to go back to those security systems, they're getting better. And I actually like to call them sort of airspace access systems, because more and more sort of what they're doing is saying that's a drone that belongs here. and wait, this one we don't know who they are, but they're getting more flexible, they're getting more accurate, they're getting more easily transportable, right? So you can move them to, we're having a big event here, we need to set up that security in 3D, the way that we always set up 2D security with the police and the gates and the whatever. We know we need to set up security 3D. It's becoming sort of reality, and the tools are there to do it.
No, absolutely. Gosh, there's so much I wanted to cover you, Miriam, and we have like 5 minutes left, which is a super bummer. Maybe what we'll do, we're going to save the predictions for 2022, maybe later. We'll talk offline about how we can do that. But let's talk a little bit about some of the key lessons learned this year. Like, what are some of the key lessons you've taken away as kind of the voice of the industry, and tracking all of the developments over the past year?
We really need each other. So this, I know this is maybe not what you were thinking of, but we had the opportunity to go back to a couple of in-person events. And wow, when I was able to see people getting together and trading ideas and talking about their new technologies and getting business done, every single person I talked to was like, wow, I've gotten more business done in this few days than I had in months previous. That yeah, we still need in-person events. We need each other. The drone industry is at such a stage of innovation and growth that we really need to communicate with other providers, with other technology sources to get together and make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So looks like we're having a little technical difficulties at the end here, but I totally agree with what you're saying, Miriam. You and I met for the first time in person at AUVSI Exponential, and that was absolutely phenomenal. And when I was at Commercial UAV in Vegas, it was the first time that I got to see all of my colleagues on Clubhouse. We were meeting weekly every Thursday, and to see them in person was absolutely spectacular. So yeah, so it looks like we have an extra guest here, which I was kind of afraid was going to happen, but we're about to wrap it up. Let me ask you this one question, Miriam, which is, what do you want to kind of close with here as we end out 2021?
So I think I gotta say, this year more than ever, and I've seen it every year, it's part of the reason that I absolutely love working in this drone industry. I have seen the drone industry really double down on being mission driven and on giving back. So I have seen more and more companies donate their software to disaster relief and nonprofits. I've seen more and more companies volunteer their time and their services to deal with disasters, or even just to sort of train underserved communities. Really, the drone army is just so powerful and so impressive. It's more than just good intentions. It's a huge benefit to communities around the world. So I got to say, if I have to leave people with one thing about the drone industry, we're the drone army. It's phenomenal.
It absolutely is. And what a year it's been. And thank you so much for helping us round out the year. Thank you so much for being such a great supporter of this podcast, and really for the whole industry. The things you write about, the companies you talk about, makes such a difference in letting people know what's out there, and that perception piece that we talked about. So thank you, Miriam. It was so great to have you. Everybody, we are closing out this episode here, but I want to remind you, this month continues on. We have actually tomorrow on our Clubhouse, 11 a.m. Mountain, 1 p.m. Eastern, Ernest Huffman from the North Central Texas Council of Governments. Texas is doing amazing things, and he'll be on this podcast next week as well. So join us in Clubhouse tomorrow. Join us on the podcast, same time next week. And everybody else have a wonderful week. We are out here. Thanks, Miriam. Fly safe.
Thank you. Take care, Don.